Hey coaches, welcome back to another deep dive. You want to help your sprinters run faster, right? Well, today we're going to break down some fascinating research that'll change how you think about speed training. We've got excerpts from a study called
Muscular strategy shift in human running.
Straight from the Journal of Experimental Biology.
Yeah, this study really gets into the nitty-gritty of how muscles power sprinting. And it reveals some pretty surprising strategies that shift depending on how fast your athletes are moving.
All right, so we all know the basic equation running speed equals stride length times stride frequency. But what's interesting here is that this study shows those two factors aren't as independent as we might think. It's not just about lengthening those strides.
Right. Increasing one often impacts the other. It's like a delicate balance. What this study reveals is that there are two distinct muscular strategies at play, depending on the speed.
So as coaches, we need to understand these strategies and how they impact our training programs.
Absolutely. The first strategy we'll unpack is all about ankle power. And it's particularly relevant for sprinters who haven't yet hit those elite speeds.
Let's say those running under 7 meters per second.
Right. At this stage, it's all about generating force during that ground contact phase. And the key player here is the soleus muscle, that deep calf muscle.
I'm already picturing those calf raises.
hmm
But help me out here. Why is the soleus so important, specifically at these lower speeds?
Well, research shows it's responsible for almost 50% of the upward push during ground contact at these speeds. So strengthening those ankle plantarflexors, that group of muscles, including the soleus, can make a significant difference in a sprinter's acceleration.
So when we talk about plantar flexion, we're talking about that pointing of the toes, that motion that helps us push off the ground, right?
You got it. It's like that spring-loaded action in the ankle.
So for those coaches listening, what are some exercises we should be focusing on for developing this ankle power? We've mentioned calf raises, but what else?
Plyometrics are excellent for building explosive power. Think jump squats, box jumps, even skipping drills. These types of exercises train those fast-twitch muscle fibers to fire quickly and powerfully.
I can see how those would translate directly to that powerful push-off we want from our sprinters. But of course, safety is paramount. Proper landing mechanics are absolutely critical, especially with those plyometric exercises. We don't want to trade speed gains for injuries.
Couldn't agree more. Quality over quantity every time.
Now, what about coaching cues? What should we be telling our athletes to help them really tap into that ankle power?
When they're doing those calf raises, tell them to focus on a full range of motion. Really feel that stretch at the bottom and a powerful squeeze at the top. For plyometrics, it's all about that explosive upward movement. Imagine launching yourself off the ground.
I love those visual cues. It's like giving them a mental roadmap for the movement.
Exactly. Now here's where things get interesting. Once those sprinters start pushing past 7 meters per second, the game changes. We shift from ankle dominance to hip dominance.
Ah, so this is where those powerful hip flexors come into play.
Precisely. At those higher speeds, stride frequency becomes the key to unlocking further speed gains. So we need to shift our focus to the muscles responsible for rapid leg acceleration during the swing phase.
We're talking about the iliopsoas, the gluteus maximus, and those powerful hamstrings, right?
You got it. These become the stars of the show at higher speeds.
All right, hold on a second. I'm already thinking ahead to those hip-focused exercises, but I have to ask, why does this shift happen around that 7 meter per second mark? What's the science behind it?
That's a great question. Essentially, at those higher speeds, the ankle plantar flexors simply can't shorten fast enough to generate maximum force. It's like trying to push off a trampoline when you're already bouncing too high. You lose that solid contact you need for power.
That analogy makes so much sense. It's like the muscles themselves hit a physiological limit.
Exactly. So the body adapts by relying more on those powerful hip flexors to drive that rapid leg turnover. And this is where our training focus needs to shift as well.
So we're talking about a fundamental shift in training approach as our athletes progress. It's not just about adding more reps or increasing the weight. It's about choosing exercises that target the right muscles for the desired speed.
You nailed it. It's about training smarter, not just harder.
So we've uncovered the first strategy, power up those ankles. We've explored the exercises, the cues, and the science behind it. But there's a whole other world of hip-driven speed waiting for us on the other side of that 7 meter per second mark. Get ready to unlock even more speed potential in part 2 of this deep dive.
Welcome back, coaches. Let's dig into that second strategy for boosting speed, unleashing hip power.
Okay, I'm all ears ready to unlock those hidden reserves of speed. So we've established that as sprinters hit those higher speeds above 7 meters per second, we need to shift focus from the ankles to the hips.
Exactly. It's all about maximizing that stride frequency, and that's where the hip flexors really come into their own.
So we're those powerhouse muscles, the iliopsoas, the gluteus maximus, and the hamstrings, right?
You got it. These muscles are responsible for driving that quick, powerful leg swing, and they become crucial at higher speeds. But here's another fascinating insight from the study. The power doesn't just come from the leg that's pushing off the ground.
Wait, what? Tell me more.
The study highlights the importance of the contralateral leg, meaning the opposite leg. As one leg pushes off the ground, the opposite leg is already swinging forward with force contributing to that rapid leg turnover.
It's not just about individual muscle strength. It's about coordinating that power between both legs.
Precisely. It's like a beautifully choreographed dance of opposing forces.
That's mind-blowing. I'm already thinking about how I can incorporate that into my coaching cues. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's talk exercises. What can we do to really target these hip flexors and hamstrings?
Well, we can start with dynamic warm-up exercises like high knees and leg swings. Focus on bringing that knee up high toward the chest and maintaining a fast, explosive motion.
So we're not just going through the motions here. We're emphasizing that power and speed right from the warm-up.
Exactly. And as we progress, we can add resistance to those leg swings using bands or cable machines.
And I'm guessing hill sprints are a must-have for building hip power.
Absolutely. Hill sprints are fantastic for developing both strength and power in those hip flexors and hamstrings.
I can feel the burn just thinking about them.
But don't forget about targeted hamstring exercises like hamstring curls and glute ham raises. These are crucial for strengthening those hamstrings and ensuring that they're able to handle the demands of high-speed sprinting.
Now, this might seem like a basic question, but I think it's worth asking. Some coaches might be thinking, well, I already include these exercises in my training program. But is there something different we should be emphasizing now that we understand these distinct muscle strategies?
That's a great point. It's not just about including the exercises, it's about understanding when and why they're most effective. As athletes progress and their speed increases, we need to shift the emphasis from those ankle-dominant exercises to those that target hip power and rapid leg turnover.
So it's not about throwing out the old exercises completely. It's about adjusting the volume and intensity based on the athlete's current speed capabilities.
Exactly. It's about fine-tuning that training program to align with these muscular strategies.
Now, I'm curious about this concept of muscle architecture. This study hinted at potential differences between sprinters and distance runners, as if their training could actually influence the structure of their muscles. Is that something you can shed some light on?
Absolutely. It's a fascinating area of research. And while we can't completely change an athlete's genetic predisposition, there's growing evidence that certain types of training can influence muscle architecture to a degree.
So we're not just talking about building bigger muscles. We're talking about potentially altering things like fascicle length and pennation angle,
Yeah,
those structural components within the muscle.
you got it. And those structural changes can have a significant impact on an athlete's power and speed capabilities.
Now, I have to admit, I'm not as familiar with these terms. Could you break them down for those of us who might need a refresher on muscle anatomy?
Of course, think of fascicles as the bundles of muscle fibers within a muscle. They're like the individual strands of a rope. Longer fascicles can generate force over a greater range of motion. And pennation angle refers to the angle at which those muscle fibers attach to the tendon. A smaller pennation angle allows for more muscle fibers to pack into a given area, increasing force production potential.
So it's like we're fine-tuning the engine itself, not just adding more fuel.
Exactly. And while more research is needed to fully understand the extent to which training can influence these factors, it's an exciting frontier in sports science.
It's incredible to think we might be able to shape those muscles at such a fundamental level. But let's bring it back to the track. What are some practical takeaways for coaches? How can we use this knowledge to help our sprinters reach their full potential?
First and foremost, it reinforces the importance of individualized training programs. We need to assess our athletes' strengths, weaknesses, and goals, and then tailor our approach accordingly.
So no more one-size-fits-all training plans.
Exactly. Each athlete is unique, and their training should reflect that. We need to be mindful of those speed thresholds and adjust our exercises and training emphasis to match the dominant muscle strategies at play.
And let's not forget those coaching cues. Those mental images and analogies can make a world of difference in helping our athletes understand and execute those movements correctly.
Absolutely. And don't underestimate the power of feedback. Watch your athletes carefully, provide specific corrections, and help them fine-tune those movements.
Those are all about observation, analysis, and adjustment. We're not just coaches, we're scientists, artists, and mentors, all rolled into one.
Well said, we're guiding our athletes on a journey of continuous improvement.
All right, coaches. We've covered a lot of ground here. We've explored those two distinct muscle strategies, the exercises that target them, and even delved into the fascinating world of muscle architecture. But the journey doesn't end here. We'll be back in part 3 to bring it all together and leave you with some final actionable insights to take your coaching to the next level. Welcome back to the final part of this deep dive, coaches.
All right, let's bring it all home.
We've explored these two powerful strategies, power up those ankles and unleashing hip power. But how do we take all this knowledge and turn it into results on the track?
Well, it all comes down to applying these principles to your training program design. Think about where your athletes are on that speed spectrum. Are they still working their way up to that 7 meters per second mark?
Or are they already pushing past it?
Right, because that's going to determine which muscle groups we prioritize and which exercises take center stage.
Okay, so for those coaches working with sprinters who are still developing that initial burst of speed, those under 7 meters per second, what should that training emphasis look like?
It's all about building a solid foundation of ankle power. Those calf muscles are the engine driving that initial push-off, so we need to make them strong and responsive.
So we're talking about prioritizing those calf raises, plyometrics, and skipping drills we discussed earlier.
Exactly. But it's not just about mindlessly pumping out reps. We want to make sure those athletes are executing those movements with precision and power.
Quality over quantity. And what about those coaching cues? What can we say to help athletes really maximize those exercises?
For calf raises, remind them to feel that full stretch at the bottom of the movement and that powerful squeeze at the top. Imagine lifting their entire body weight with just those calf muscles.
And for plyometrics, it's all about explosiveness.
Exactly. Cue them to explode upward as if they're trying to jump out of the gym. But again, emphasize safe landing mechanics. We want to build power, not injuries.
For sure. Now, what about those athletes who are already hitting those higher speeds? The ones who are ready to unleash that hip-driven power?
Okay, well, for these athletes, we shift gears. The focus now is on developing those hip flexors and hamstrings, the muscles responsible for rapid leg turnover.
So those high knees, resisted leg swings, and hill sprints become our bread and butter.
Exactly. But we also want to pay attention to those finer details. Remember the contralateral leg, that opposing force that contributes to speed?
Right. It's all about that coordinated power between both legs.
Yeah, so when you're coaching those high knees, remind your athletes to drive that opposite arm forward with force mimicking that sprinting motion. And for those resisted leg swings, encourage them to really focus on that whipping motion, generating power from both the hip flexors and the hamstrings.
I see it now. These subtle adjustments can make a big difference in how our athletes translate those exercises to actual sprinting performance.
Absolutely. It's all about those fine-tuning details.
Before we wrap up, I want to touch on something you mentioned earlier, this idea that targeted training could actually influence muscle architecture itself. Is there anything more you can share about that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating area of research, and while more studies are needed, there's growing evidence to suggest that we can, to some extent, shape those muscles at a deeper level.
So we're not just building bigger muscles, we're potentially influencing things like fascicle length and pennation angle, those structural components within the muscle that can impact power and speed.
Exactly. And while we can't completely rewrite an athlete's genetic code, we can certainly create training programs that encourage those adaptations.
So it's like we're not just coaches, we're architects sculpting those muscles for peak performance.
That's a great analogy. It's about understanding the building blocks of speed and using that knowledge to create training programs that unlock an athlete's full potential.
And that, folks, is the power of these deep dives. We go beyond those surface-level training tips and really explore the science behind speed. We uncovered two distinct muscle strategies, the exercises that target them, and even touched on that fascinating world of muscle architecture.
Remember, coach's knowledge is power. Armed with this knowledge, you have the tools to transform your athletes from good to great.
So get out there, experiment, observe, and keep pushing those boundaries. Who knows, maybe you'll be the one to discover the next breakthrough in speed training. Until then, keep those legs pumping and those minds engaged